Hello and welcome to episode 21 of Massalia Tales. On the last episode we saw a little bit of a shake-up in the political situation with the Timo Choi, a new faction arising as the player faction as a result of patch 16, with everyone else being lumped onto the council, which are now the rivals of the player, which could cause some issues later on. In terms of battles, we saw the Rieti move a large army down from the mountains to attack Eusebios and the Daemons of Polymus outside Mediolanum. The battle was in our advantage and we simply pushed the enemy back, completely surrounding them and beating their forces with superior infantry, plus the enemy's morale was a little bit shaky compared to that of our veteran troops. So the province was successfully defended and it allowed Eusebios to move on to attack Batavium, which was now undefended by the Rieti. They did have a moderately large garrison army, although that force wasn't going to be able to stand up to Eusebius' men, who simply attacked the choke points that the enemy were defending and broke through with superior infantry power and a huge missile superiority. So now the town is as good as ours and we're ready to continue. The fall of Batavium brought the threat of Greek invasion to the Nori, a powerful militaristic kingdom east of the Alps who had pledged to help their fallen Rieti brothers repel the Massalian advance. To Eusebius leading the eastward march, the resistance they were inciting was cause enough to continue his goal of both pacifying and assimilating all of the Alpine kingdoms under the rule of the city's council. Gelon too saw chances for glory in the Gallic interior, scouting the strongholds of the Sequani tribe for weaknesses. All the while, only the unremarkable Homer and his marines guarded the increasingly isolated Massalian homeland. So, the forces guarding Batavium have been destroyed by Eusebius' night attack on their forces, now meaning that this settlement will be ours, which of course is the final settlement in Cisalpina. We've unified this province under Massalian rule now. The province though is very unruly, the public order situation is very bad, a rebellion is pretty much imminent even after a rebellion happened so recently. Now I noticed that Batavium has in particular this watchtower which is destroying our food supply. You can see our food has now gone negative, so we're in trouble. I need to start sorting out some extra food or getting rid of whatever's using the food, and I decided I would go for that latter option because I thought the bonuses given to me by this watchtower are definitely not going to counteract the fact that we're going to suffer attrition across our entire empire if we can't get the food back. So I decided to just destroy the building outright. Now for Gelon, there's an opportunity to start moving either towards the Sequani or towards the remaining Rieti settlement to the east. For now, I'm just going to move up the roads away from Octoduron because I use up all my movement points doing so anyway. So I still have the option to move north to attack the Sequani or east to attack the Rieti. I wanted to see on the diplomacy table if any of these tribes would actually go in for peace. The Sequani wouldn't, which is pretty much what they've been doing the whole time. The Rieti still wouldn't, despite being defeated many times recently, and the Nori wouldn't either, but I wouldn't expect them to because we haven't really had any military contact with them yet. Some good diplomatic news is that we get a small trade route going with the Egyptians. This isn't really important in terms of money because it's not worth very much. I suspect they make much more from this trade than we do, but it's nice because it exposes some of the map along the trade route, so we get a little bit more intelligence. The Carthaginians there, still neutral towards us but refusing to go into non-aggression. Now as we move on, we get some particularly bad news.
Breaking a man is easy. Breaking his spirit, less so. Even kept in darkness, a man may look to break his bonds, seek revenge.
So the many slaves we've been taking during our eastward campaign are apparently rising up, and they appear just on the right hand side of the screen there, right next to the Daemons of Polymus, so that's convenient at least. We're going to be able to engage them very soon. Nearby also the Nori move forces into Batavium and start raiding on the border, not committing to a full invasion for now. This is actually quite a problem because you can see the public order situation is really bad and the food situation is still bad as well. I wanted to see if I could untax Massalia itself to help out, but that didn't really help. It just made me very poor and slightly less hungry. So I decided I'm going to have to not tax any of Cisalpina, which will lose me a lot of money, but it keeps the food supply in the green. So I'm going to do that for now. Of course, I don't want to leave it like that, so I'm going to have to start constructing some food-producing buildings. So since I happened to destroy stuff in Batavium, I decided to replace that stuff that was using food with farms that will generate more food. So hopefully in the future I'll be able to rebalance the situation. The next problem to deal with is the slaves. The slave army is very powerful, much more powerful than the previous rebel army that we saw spring up in Genua recently. Luckily, with the daemons right here, we have a chance to engage them, so I'm going to move them out of the town to attack the enemy's army. But first, I decided to try and seduce Areti agent who was nearby, because this agent keeps ruining our movement points, especially for Crethius, who is currently essentially stuck in Mediolanum. I try to seduce her with Ifianassa, and it kind of works, just hindering them, but unfortunately not quite getting them to turn over to our side, which is what I was hoping. Anyway, back to the slaves. I move the daemons to attack them. The balance bar looks pretty far in our favour. Their force is depleted because it suffered winter attrition, so that's excellent news. The force itself is a whole load of medium and light infantry, but levelled up. So not something we can easily ignore, but of course Eusebius' forces have a lot of heavy infantry and they are somewhat levelled up as well, although not quite as elite as these slaves are apparently. Plus we have a minor garrison force helping out. Hopefully we can destroy these slaves.
With one hand, they offer peace, with the other, death. And in the end, they loosen their grasp and scatter both on our lands. The Greeks think they are the masters of all, when in truth, they are not even their own masters. I have spoken with many a Massalian noble who will pay us good money to destroy Eusebius and his exhausted army of homesick old men. They call themselves the Timauchoi, but I call them fools like all Greeks. But a fool's money is money nonetheless. So, brothers, never again will a Gaul have to work beneath the feet of a Greek. Never again will you see your family harmed by those hairless brats. Never again will we lift a finger for anyone not showering us with coin.
Today, I have consulted oracles and witnessed omens, and through them I know the gods have given me brave men to lead into battle. Now, forwards! Victory awaits!
So Eusebius' forces begin their advance on the slave army, which has positioned itself on a slight hill just above Eusebius. My formation is pretty standard, with a bunch of heavy infantry in the middle and this large group of swordsmen and light javelin men out on the right flank, forming an almost separate group who are going to go around and engage the enemy in a very large degree on their left flank. Meanwhile, we've also got the garrison forces coming in from the edge of the map. Not very powerful, but all together they might be able to help out. So I'm going to move these guys to engage the enemy's right flank, but I noticed there's this ridge, so if they form up right here, the enemy won't be able to see them, so I can have these guys go into hiding. The enemy might just forget about them, and then I can launch a surprise attack on their right flank if the chance arises. The enemy formation is pretty standard and pretty strong. They've got a bunch of their light infantry and archers in front of the army. The second line is all of their medium spears, and the back line, as you can see, is mostly swordsmen, some of which are heavy, some of which are medium. So the enemy has a pretty defensive formation at the moment. It's going to be up to us to just march towards it and attempt to assault it, or see at least if we can bait the enemy into attacking our hoplite lines. So now a little bit later, you can see I've got my javelins and swordsmen ready to attack the enemy's left flank, but curiously they're actually pulling off a fine defensive tactic. They're forming a left echelon, so two battle lines being formed separately. This is something I've never seen the AI actually do, so I just wanted to point it out. And since they have done this, this essentially makes my attack on the enemy's left flank much less likely to succeed, although it will slightly strengthen my frontal assault. Some good news also is that my forces approaching to attack the enemy's right flank have now arrived, so I can begin my attack on their position in earnest.
We await your command.
As I got close and started to increase the pace of my advance, the enemy army started messing itself up. I think they decided they were going to change their formation at the last minute, possibly because they wanted to change the echelon on the left flank. But as they were doing so, they seemed to just merge into a charging formation. Eventually, they pushed their light infantry out in front and just rushed right at me. So it seems the enemy are going to go into a charge, slightly to their advantage because they will be going a little bit downhill, but that's good for me. Saves me running uphill to get towards them. so I'm going to stand my ground. At first we're bombarding the incoming enemies with arrows, they're doing the same to us. The enemy probably have an archer advantage because they have many archers that are at level 4 or 5. Will do good damage against my men. The first few volleys aren't going to do all that much, but once they start really pounding me and getting my health down, they will be a problem. My own archers are attempting to return fire at the enemy's infantry, but of course not doing very much for pretty much the same reason. The infantry battle is going to start with both sides at pretty much full health. The skirmish did nothing. So I'm pulling back my skirmishing forces there to let the Hoplite phalanx now present the front of our line. Eusebios and his men are actually taking the brunt of the enemy's missile fire, you can see here. The enemy focused their archers on javelins on him, which is probably a good idea, though you can also see they're throwing javelins at the light forces even behind Eusebios. So I don't know what they were trying to do, but regardless of that, the enemy's main line has now engaged with my Hoplites, which is exactly what I want. I want them all to get distracted fighting my line because they won't be able to break through it. They'll even take a good number of losses fighting with it, and whilst they're doing that, all of these flanking forces are going to come right behind the enemy's army. And my guys breaking out from the ridge over on the enemy's right flank are going to advance as well. Unfortunately, the enemy did leave a lot of reserves behind, so actually this flanking tactic isn't ideal. It seems they didn't fully commit to this charge. The good news is that their charge was essentially unsuccessful. They haven't broken through the line. We've still got a few men of depth. Eusebios, just behind them with his troops, is currently being bombarded by the enemy's archers. You can see they're focusing arrows on him, and at first that's not going to do much, but they are starting to inflict casualties on him, and actually once their health gets low, a couple of volleys will decimate his unit. So he is going to be a little bit of trouble if I don't move him or engage him. Eventually I will notice what's going on though. Meanwhile, I tried to advance up a pike phalanx on my left flank, but the enemy's large reserve allowed them to engage the pikes from the front, initially a bad idea, but then come and slam into the flank with another unit of swordsmen, absolutely ideal for taking out this pike phalanx. So that could be a little bit of a problem, although the fact that I have the enemy outflanked to the rear means I could be able to solve it soon. On the other flank, things are actually going much further my way. We've got this huge block of enemy troops engaging against the unit right at the end of the line, but they're being targeted by all of these javelin men who I've moved up to just throw javelins generally into this huge enemy formation, and that's going to do a lot of damage, especially coming from behind, and the enemy forces lost troops so quickly that they're already beginning to rout early on in the battle. More and more javelins coming in and cutting the enemy down, so they're realizing they can't break through my line, and the longer they try, the more javelins they're taking, and they start to rout, meaning that the right end of my line can now start pushing forwards and folding around the enemy's center. Completely ideal. Over on the other side, I tried to save my pike phalanx by counter-surrounding the enemy's flanking forces, charging in with the light forces and some of the militia coming in from the garrison force. So now that we have those enemies surrounded, we should be able to hold on. The center of the enemy is beginning to break up. You can see some of these units have kind of routed and come back into the fight. In general, they're not fully utilising their men. Most of them are stuck behind allied troops not fighting properly. I decided it was time for a final push and ordered Eusebios to charge the centre to try and break some of the enemy's low-quality units. The man himself charges right through the line, not joining the phalanx, just charging forwards to engage in the loose melee in front of the line, cutting down an opponent immediately and then engaging in melee with the enemy's swordsmen. The enemy are starting to rout already at this point. We already routed one unit as we charged. The remaining swordsmen will not be too happy about fighting against our elite troops and will be killed in relatively short order. Meanwhile, the units to the sides are starting to rout as well as we continue to fold around the backs of enemy units, causing mass routs wherever we can. You can see there's still a lot of messy stuff going on behind enemy lines, especially with these enemy phalanx units that have just set up big blocks and are now attempting to fight, mainly just locking them in position with inferior units until I can get more men on the scene. Far behind the battle, I've got this unit of swordsmen, which I forgot about, chasing off an enemy skirmishing unit. They'll be chasing them forever, essentially. Here you can see the enemy skirmishers have surrounded one squad of my garrison hoplites. There's 20 men surrounded by hundreds of enemies, but my guys are so much better in close combat that we're just slaughtering the enemy, and the enemy are of course starting to rout because of army losses as well, meaning they're not going to want to continue this fight. My main line is now moving up to support my men. Overall, the enemy's army is now in complete disarray. The units that are still fighting won't be for long. A couple of them did start coming back from routing, which is a bit annoying, especially because the enemy's phalanx units don't rout whilst the rest of the enemy army does, which means there's more time for enemy units to come back from routing. You can see this squad here actually comes in to rear attacks of my archers. I didn't see them at all. This is a fantastic opportunity for the enemy to get some revenge, but they routed as soon as they made contact there. I think because of army losses overall, the rest of their units seemed to rout at the same time. This means it's a decisive victory for Eusebius' men. It seems the Daemons of Polemus have won a very healthy victory against the slave army, completely pushed them off the field and almost destroyed them. The uprising is now doomed. We have broken the back of this rebellion, but really the concern is that we had to do that at all. Without the proper resources in place to control our slaves and client tribes, we cannot even begin the process of civilizing these lands. Decurion, have a scribe write to Gelon. We want no more of his northern slaves mixing with the people of Cisalpina. They are boisterous, ill-mannered, and cost as much to keep alive as they produce in profits. This province needs something more than industry and farms. It needs trade, the invisible power that made our city great. Slowly, without the world seeing, we shall build ourselves a republic to rival that late Rome. So let's see the battle results from that engagement. It looks like we lost less than 10% of our army, the enemy losing so much of their army that they're pretty much incapacitated. I took a couple of hundred of captives who I decided to kill to set an example to the other slaves in the province. So the enemy has a small surviving army that's rushed off into the mountains there. I decided I was going to chase after it because I kind of want to be going in that direction anyway, because you can see the Nori raiding on our border need to be dealt with. If they keep raiding, they're going to inflict a massive public order penalty, which I can't really sustain. We'll just be seeing more rebellions at that rate. So the battle against the remnant of the slave army is going to be pretty easy. We can destroy them with 99% of our force intact, and I choose to do so. We are going to take a few of the remaining slaves captive actually, and I decided I would send these guys back into captivity.
On the move.
Some men are born to lead. Others are destined to kneel before their masters.
So hopefully by sending those surviving slaves back to work, they'll be able to spread the message of what happened to the Great Slave Uprising, and how that if anyone thinks about doing it again, they're probably going to face a similar fate. In the meantime, we've got the Nori to worry about. You can see they have a fairly decent looking army sitting on our border raiding, but the main problem which prevents me from attacking it is they have another giant army right behind it, plus they're next to their capital city with its massive garrison. So I can't possibly attack them, I have to just let them raid. The only way I can stop them is to present a juicy target to force them to advance into my province. But because if they do that, I want to be as strong as possible, because I'm going to have to face off possibly both stacks at once, I decided to move back to be closer to Batavium so I could make use of the small garrison force there. It's only going to be a couple of hundred men strong, but having a couple of hundred more men is certainly going to be better than nothing. Next up, I had to decide what to do with Gelon, and I'd kind of already decided I wanted to move him east. I'm going to ignore the Sequani, hope they don't attack Octojuron whilst I campaign into Coria and try and destroy the Raeti once and for all. You can see that Coria has a moderate garrison, but almost no standing army. Next turn I should be able to attack, and if I can get them to fight in a field battle, I will definitely win against them. Now it's time to have a little look at the political situation. We can see the Timur Choi, and we have only a single guy actually in it at the moment who has absolutely no influence. He's some sort of mirthful individual. I can promote him to Agaranimus, which will actually give the Timur Choi a little bit of influence. So you can see we now have 17% power. The council, containing everyone else, is still dominating, especially because it has Eusebius and Gelon, who together have massive gravitas and so dominate the politics of Massalia. Both of them are fairly ambitious as well, so they're only going to want to try and grab more. Now Gelon hasn't changed much since we last saw him. He's pretty much as rude as he is talented by the looks of it. Homer, our admiral, is a pretty standard sort of guy. He looks like a steadfast leader. He's got good traits, nothing particularly bad or nothing outstandingly good about him. Only a small amount of gravitas because he hasn't had much involvement in our campaigns. And Crethius, our new general, appears to be somewhat inbred, perhaps a noble, although friends of the Celts, a peaceable and bureaucratic individual, so a perfect guy to be a governor of our new territories in Cisalpina. So that's the setup in the political realm of Massalia. Moving on, I was trying to do some diplomacy with the Raeti, and it seems they might accept peace with me. Finally, now that we have them completely cornered and are about to attack them, they actually consider peace as an option. The Nori, who I really wanted peace with, of course, are not going to accept it. The Sequani, who would be useful to have peace with at this stage, won't accept it either. I wanted to see what terms the Reti might still consider as a moderate diplomatic deal. They won't be my client state, which is annoying. I wanted to see if they would break their alliance with the Nori, which also would be somewhat useful to me, but they won't take that either. So if there's not going to be any kind of terms here, since I have a huge advantage, I am not going to allow peace and will press on against them in the future. Now, as I go into the next turn, the Nori do attack Batavium, I guess as I'd hoped, but actually this is a pretty dangerous situation. Their 2 stacks are attacking the daemons of Polymus, and you can see from the balance bar that the enemy have a pretty gigantic advantage. They have pretty much almost 3-to-1 numerical advantage on our forces, so we're going to be certainly surrounded by these guys. They have loads of very heavy hoplite spearmen, as much as we do, so they can match us for heavy spear lines, but they have tons of medium spears and swords who will be able to swarm our army, and our garrison army there is not going to be much help, although as I said, it's better than nothing. So Eusebios must now make a stand, both to defend Cisalpina and to defend his own life. We'll see how it goes next time. The speed with which the slave uprising was crushed sent a clear message to all Massalian subjects. But still, the war the Greeks had brought to the province was destroying the economy and social order of the historic tribes the region was home to. Attempts to forcibly Hellenize these people, although not entirely ineffective, were stirring up yet more tensions. Only Cretheus managed to maintain a vestige of support from the common man, but that support made him the butt of anti-Gallic slurs across the Republic. He was determined to bring peace to his people, but those people had other ideas.